And we created a function earlier, add item to slot, which we can actually make use of in this case. So the item that or the widget that we want to add to is the widget we're just currently working on, and the item we want to work on sending in is the remaining item. We should set this to promote this to a local variable. So local remaining. That doesn't work. Let's try this again. Local remaining variable. And the reason we do this is because we're going to have a value for it the first time we get in here, but then afterwards we're going to be adding it potentially multiple times here. If we have, let's for example, this shouldn't be happening. Most of the times you should only, or almost, actually all of the time you should only be able to like put it in one empty slot. But if we have some code that allows us to, let's say, send 200 health potions to us in the inventory, and that would take multiple slots, then we want to be able to process multiple empty slots, just hawking off the one max stack at a time for that, which is why we want to have this sent in here, and we want to have it set here afterwards so that it's updated with a new value. And then we also want to have a branch after this which checks against if it's greater than 0 or not. And the reason for that is if the amount is greater than 0 is false, then we don't actually need to try and add this anymore. We can actually abort this loop, which means we will connect this to our break over here. And then we'll make some reroute nodes so it's a little bit more manageable to read. Like so. So it loops back here and says break if we don't have anything remaining, which means that we will be returning over here. And this should, just like before, it should be returning both our remaining items and a boolean for. You cannot have the same name. You see we have one input parameter. I can't have the same name for an output parameter, so I'm just adding an S to have them slightly differentiating. If after you're done with this and you want to continue with this specific inventory system and make it different, you could always go back and change the outputs to something else, like saying output remaining items and input remaining items, or whatever you want to make it sensible to you. Let's see here, amount greater than 0, like so. And what we need to do here is we need to have the same function we had before. This one that checks if the amount is greater than 0. And we'll have the completed going here and the local remaining item going in there to do the actual check. Like so. So if we go back to our attempt to add, let's see, this one is the one I'm after. So now we have made code for actually adding to empty slots. So attempt to add to empty slots, that one. Like so. Make this a little bit larger so it encompasses it. I'll move this one a bit also. So now we have theoretically tried to let's see, do we have a, so this variable needs to go in here. It's the remaining items that we're trying to process. trying to get this to be a little bit more visible with all these boxes. Maybe the boxes are not a good idea, but generally speaking, it's good to comment your code. But maybe in this instance, it's not helping me that much. And again, we have a node here that has been successfully added over here. And if it has not been successfully added, then we need to drop the item on the floor. Yes. So we need to make a function for that as well. So we'll just call it drop item, I think. So we go to our event graph and we create an event and we call it drop item, like so. And it needs to know what kind of an item that we're going to be dropping. So it's going to be using the item info structure. We call it item to drop. Now, this is where we have some of the code that's a little bit special. If we start off with this as item here, we need to break it up. And we're going to be using the item class here to spawn an actor. Spawning an actor from class. We're going to be inputting the class. Now, if we were to define exactly which class this was, if we were to say it's going to be a BP health potion, for example, then you can see that we're gonna get something like item info here as our, because that's exposed on spawn. That's how we have set it for the BP potion. But if we choose to spawn it dynamically by this item class, then this item info is going to be, okay, it's not disappearing anymore. Maybe it doesn't update properly. Spawn actor, like so. We don't have this, we do have an item info there. Ah, right, because we have item pickup class. I didn't even think about that. All right then. We can actually streamline this a little bit then. Let's just hide this, drag this item info. I must have totally missed this when I was playing around earlier to test things out. Because then I created a fallback, because if you have something like that's specific. Now we have the parent class here. This is always going to be an item pickup class. So the health potion and mana potion are both having this class as the parent. And we define in the parent that this should be exposed, which means that it's appearing because it knows that it doesn't know if it's going to be a health potion or a mana potion, but at least it knows it's going to be an item pickup which has this exposed. So that allows us to actually skip a few other steps that we had. So that's going to be nice. It's going to be a little bit less code, which is good because this is like taking a lot of time so far already. When it comes to where it's supposed to spawn, we're going to get owner. And owner means that it's going to get whichever actor is owning this actor component, which is going to be a character, because the character is going to be dropping most of the time. Or is the only one who's going to be actively dropping items. But if a chest, for example, was commanded in some way to drop an item, then it would find the chest's location, or the chest owner, the chest as the owner here. And then we can get actor location from this. And that in turn we can use as our transform over here. So, and that's going to be our drop functionality. That's all that's going to be requiring. Now let's see here, what do we need to do? First of all, we should save everything, and let's see which part we should attack next. This is probably a good time to start testing out some of the functionality as well. So let's go to our third person character And yeah, we had this interact, which is supposed to pick up items, and we didn't really continue doing anything about that. So let's see here. We want to interact with all the items that we find over here. So we'll call on the interact with interface that we had before, like so. It wants to have the interacting player, which is going to be us. However, we don't have a reference to our player controller. So what we'll do is we'll add a begin play here. And we will get controller. No, how about controller? Let's see what this is. Fairly sure it should get control. There we have it. Okay, must have spelled something wrong. Anyway, so by getting controller for a specific pawn, meaning us here in this case, we will be getting the controller for this pawn. And we know that we are a player, so we're going to be casting this to a player controller. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to have it saved for later on without having to cast it repeatedly and get it all the time. So we're going to promote this to a variable, and we're going to call it player controller ref. My keyboard is messing up again. Let's try it again. Player controller ref. And then once we have this set over here, that means that we can actually make use of it down below here, like so. In addition to that, we also have our HUD that we want to have set up. So we'll create a widget at our begin play. We'll choose the WHUD. And we'll use our player reference as the owning player for that. And we will add that to our viewport. So that appears. There is one more thing that we probably want to keep track of. And that is we created a we have this inventory container over here. We want to keep a reference for that as well, so we can make use of it later. Actually, I changed my mind. I don't think we will be needing that. So let's get back to our actual event of adding to inventory here instead. Now, the event of adding item to inventory is basically where we started off before, and we ended up on this tangent of creating like a lot of interconnected logic. This is sort of an issue with something like that. It isn't super easy to debug and test all the way throughout. Trial and error isn't that easy. Because you get larger chunks of code before you can actually test something out. That's not entirely true. When I did a trial run of this first, I did do a lot more testing and stuff like that, but the creation of the blueprints became sort of fragmented that I figured that this would be easier to understand. I'm not entirely sure if that ended up being the case, but I will be spending the last episode of this series at least going through the flow of the inventory system. So even if you are not able to follow along completely right now, hopefully by the end of it you will still be able to understand everything. Anyway, so this blueprint component now should have a attempt to add item. So we should be able to call this. And this, whoopsie daisy, this is the item that we try to add. And then we have a branch that is going to be checking if it was successfully added or not. Actually, we don't need that either, I think. We could have it for debugging purposes, I guess. So when we get there. So we'll just do a few print string nodes so we have something like so. And then we'll say that this one was added. If we end up here, then this meant that it was dropped. And just to double check that this logic is all done, it's not completely done. We have the dropping still missing here. So we need to do the drop item event. And we do it like so. And the item that we're going to be dropping is this item, of course. Like so. Okay, now hopefully we should be able to do some testing, I think. Actually, I realized pretty quickly we have to do one more thing. We need to have the ability to show our HUD and our inventory. So let's focus on getting that done then. We need to create an event, an input action here. So we'll call it, go to project settings again. And inputs. And we'll create a new action mapping which we'll call ShowHide Inventory. And we'll default this to the key for I, which is generally what is used for inventories. And then we can close that down and we can go back to our third person character again. And then we'll get the ShowHide Inventory event. Did I not spell it like that? Show and then let me double check. Yes, inputs. Shoe. The shoe hide. That's not gonna be good. Show hide. Okay, we go back again. So show hide inventory. So when we press this key, we want to have the inventory shown or hidden from us. Which means we need to implement some functionality in our blueprint component again to allow for this. And this is going to be the last big chunk of code. So what we're going to be doing is we go to our blueprint component, like so. We go to our event graph and we create an event here, which we call, we don't have a whole lot of events here. We'll create one that we call show hide inventory. It's a good name. So this will show the inventory that we have as a player, but we also want it to show a loot chest, for example. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a macro. And you can find it here under macros, and you just add macro. And the reason we do this is because we want to have the ability to have different output streams, basically, allowing us to go different ways depending on which situation that we are in. So to start off, we're going to make input here, and we're going to make it of the type execute, and we're going to name it execute, which will make the name disappear, and it will just be a blank pin like that. And from here, we're going to be having some functionality here. We're also going to have a few outputs. We're going to have 2 execution pins here, and one that says it's an external inventory, meaning a loot chest. So that's the path we will take then. Then we'll have an internal inventory, which means it's our own inventory, because we're going to have slightly different logic for these. In between these, we're going to have a branch which allows us to go either the first or the second way. And we're also going to be needing a function here to determine if it is an external or internal inventory. So we'll be creating a function for that, and we'll call that function check external inventory, like so. And it's not going to be super complicated. It's going to take a player controller reference, and as an output it's just going to be having a boolean which says it's an external inventory. And we'll name this the interactive player. Like so. So from this player controller, we're gonna get its pawn, because that's where we have our component. So get controlled pawn, and we want to check this to see if this is the same thing. So if the controller is controlling the same pawn as the owner of this component is. So if this is a chest, then the owner for this active component will be the chest, and it won't be the controller, which means that it will be an external inventory. But if the controlled pawn and the owner of this control, then it means it's an internal inventory. So we need to have, since this return node here says it returns true on an external inventory, we need to negate this one, because this one will be true when it is the same, meaning that it is the player's inventory. I hope that made sense. So that's the logic we're going to be having in there. We go back to our macro. We will rename our macro to is external inventory question mark, like so. And we're going to use this function we just created, like so. And then we are going to we need to add some functionality here. We need to add a player controller as an input here as well, because we need to send it to our new function that we just did, right? Like so. And we'll call it, there we are, interacting player. We'll send it in there. We'll send out the boolean there, and we connect these together. So now if we go back, let's see, where were we? ShowHide Inventory. So we want to call this macro now from this point. And you can see that we need our interacting players. So we're going to be adding this to our event as well. I'm not very good at spelling, like so. So from here, we're going to be going slightly different paths. We have one path which is for our external inventory, and we have one for our internal inventory. So let's start off with our internal inventory. For that, we're going to be creating yet another macro, because we're going to be making something that allows us to switch between showing the inventory and not. So we're going to be calling it change inventory visibility. And we're going to be adding one input, two outputs. They're all going to be of execution type. We call the first one execute, so the name disappears. We're going to have the first output node be called now hidden. So it's clear to see from outside the macro to see what state we entered when we are in here. And now shown is the other output. Inside of this, we are going to get our inventory reference. Because this one is the one that's going to be keeping track of the actual widget. And this one we will get the visibility on to determine what kind of visibility it has. And then we're gonna switch on that, which will allow us to do different things depending on what kind of a state it is in. So if it was visible before, we're gonna set it to a different visibility now. So get a reference again, we set visibility. We're gonna change from visible to hidden. And then we copy that. And then from collapsed, which is another way of being hidden, and hidden, we're both gonna go these ways. And we're gonna say that it's visible. And then we're gonna be connecting these up with our outputs. So this one is visible, so it's now shown. This one is hidden, so it's now hidden. And that concludes that part. So now we can actually call this, like so. And from here, we just go like so. And after that, we want to set some visibility and some options from our player controller, because when we show our inventory, we want to show the mouse cursor, for example. So we can do a set mouse, set show mouse, set, is it just show mouse? There we go, set show mouse cursor. So we're gonna have one over here, we're gonna have a different one below it. Like so. So when the inventory is hidden, then we don't want to show our mouse cursor, but when it is shown, we want to show the mouse cursor. In addition to that, we also need to set our input modes. So when we are hiding our inventory, we want to go to game only. Looks like that. But when we are actually showing the inventory, we want to set the input mode to game and UI, allowing us to actually interface with the user interface. And we get a interface or a widget here to focus on, so we're going to be picking this one. And that should be pretty much that. So this is what will happen when we are interacting with our own inventory, so to speak. So to deal with the other case, when we have a chest, we need to check first inventory reference and check if this is valid. Because it's not always going to be valid, it might be something that we haven't interacted with before. After we have done that, we need to determine what we will do in these two cases. If we already know about the inventory reference, then we can actually change its visibility just like we did with the other one. So we can do it like so, and then we are done with that. When it comes to the is not valid, however, we need to initialize our widget. We need to make sure that it actually gets this reference set, among other things. So we're going to be creating another event here. We'll call it init widget. And this one we want to have a clear controller for. And we'll call it interacting player again, like so. So the first thing we need to determine here again is if it's external or internal, because we're going to be running this for both of these cases, but in different times. And let's see here. When we are using an external inventory, we want to find out if it has any items to begin with that are already in the chest, so to speak. So to do that, we need to create a function. First of all, we need to get owner, because this is going to be a chest, so the owner will be the chest. And then we need to find out which of these are available. So we go to item pickup, and we have this. No, we have not created it yet, it seems. Okay, so we'll create a new variable called current items, and we'll make this a array, like so. And we can also expose this and make it instance editable, so it's easy to change in runtime for us. But essentially what we want to do is we want to be able to send this information to the blueprint component. So we need to have some kind of interaction with that. So class settings wise, we have our interactable here, but we also want to have our inventory available here. Because this is a function that feels like we should be putting in our interface for inventory. So now we have added that, we'll go to our BPI inventory and we'll create a new function. And we'll call this one get current inventory items. And we'll have an output of s items that is an array. We'll call it current items, like so. So now we have defined the function in the interface, which means that we can go back to our item pickup again, and it should have appeared over here, get current items. So we'll inventory items, there we go. And we'll just plug in our current items in this return, which means that we're done now and it's available to get. So we can go back here and we can say get current items. So now it will try to get the items from the owner here and make use of that. So this is where it's for the first time is going to be creating the actual inventory for a chest, which means that we need to create a widget. And this needs to be of the type W inventory container. And the inventory container, as you might remember before, we actually exposed a starting inventory, so we can actually just add that over there. For now, we'll just put number of rows to 4 and number of... Actually, it was the other way around, wasn't it? 3, 4 maybe? I don't entirely remember. But so it's the same as the other ones. Since this system isn't built completely on being able to scale visually the inventory system, then we don't have the freedom to use whatever we want here without it looking a little bit silly. So this is what we're unfortunately stuck with doing right now. After that, we're actually going to be setting the inventory reference, because now we have actually created the inventory, like so. And after that, we are going to determine where should we be showing this widget that we created, because we can't add it to the viewport just straight up, because adding it to the viewport straight up will allow it. The easiest way is probably just to do this and show add to viewport. If we hover over this, it says it adds it to the game's viewport and fills the entire screen. So this will not be ideal for us in this situation, which is also why we created the overlay over here. This overlay is supposed to be our placeholder, sort of where we can have the other inventory appear. So we need to create an interface to allow to get this. So if we go back to our BPI inventory, over there, we're going to be creating another function here that's called get loot inventory placement, like so. And this one is going to return an overlay. So it's going to be this one, overlay object reference. And the reason why it's an overlay object reference, and we're gonna have the single one, not an array one, is because we just created an overlay over here. This is of the type overlay, and that is why we want that specific type. So let's rename this to inventory overlay container. Now that we have that done, we can actually go back to our inventory here, and we can say that we want to, from our pawn, so we need to get we have the player controller, we need to get this controlled pawn, because that's the place where we have the interfaces on. And then we add, or not add, but we get the inventory container. Loot inventory placement, this one, like so. And that should give us our placement where we can actually add it. So from here, we can type in add child to overlay. And we can actually add our newly created inventory in there. And that should be all that we need to do for that part. We still have the issue or the code to handle the normal inventory, the internal inventory. So we need to do something similar for that. We need to create, also before we move on, we want to actually let's see where we have it. That is all for this episode. Hope to see you in the next one. Keep on learning. Take care.